Yo, what's good? Many a time when there's a boxing rivalry or a boxing build-up, the build-up seems forced. It seems like it's a work. Like they're acting, like they're just doing it to sell. They're just doing it for profit, like a lot of the pay-per-views we see today where these men are pretending to hate each other. And you know that it's just hate during the promotion, that it's not genuine hate or even genuine dislike, that they just don't they just dislike each other because they're fighting. They don't dislike each other as people. That they actually respect each other. But this was not the case for Chris Eubank versus Nigel Benn, who gave the boxing world two great fights. And though I think this fight's a little, their rivalry is a little underrated in the United States, it really shouldn't be, because the rivalry is just as intense as any other. Man, their contract signing. When do you see a freaking contract signing that's televised? Never. I've never seen one. Like in recent years, do you see a contract, not a press conference, not a face off, a contract signing? That stuff straight out of WWE, I swear. But in the face off, Chris Eubank had his back towards Nigel Benn. He's like, "Oh, I'll face him during the fight. I'll face him during the fight. I don't have to face him right now." And as Chris Eubank didn't want to admit that he hated Nigel Benn, Nigel Benn said, personally, I hate this man. I hate him. So the picture you see here, that's legitimate. That's how it was. Eubank ignoring Ben, and Ben staring a hole through Chris Eubank. And then later in Eubank's book, he admitted that Ben was one of the most intimidating man, probably the most intimidating man he ever faced, and that the tactics he did before the fight actually did get to him. I read a little bit about him. He said he was without doubt the most terrifying man I had ever met. Still is. In his book, Chris Eubank said that. So you knew it was gonna be a good fight, and Eubank, not known for a power puncher, they were a complete opposites. Nigel Benn was 27-1 with 25 knockouts, and Eubank was 24-0 with 14 knockouts. So Eubank wasn't a heavy hitter, but get this, he knocked out 9 of his last 10 opponents, and Eubank had 25 knockouts in 28 fights. Eubank's last fight ended in 20 seconds. I truly think that Eubank inspired a young Naseem Hamed who was at that fight when Eubank knocked out Reginaldo dos Santos in 20 seconds. Prince Naseem Hamed was there, and you could see him in awe at that moment when Eubank knocked out dos Santos. And I think Eubank had a lot to do with how Naseem Hamed presented himself, how he would walk into the ring with swagger. Just look at this picture of Eubank, man. Look at his confidence. Look at the stance. Look at his stare. He's just such a confident, arrogant, cocky man. He'd call Ben wild, and he said that you are mine, he would tell him. So there was no love lost between these men. And entering this fight was in November 18th, 1990. So before the fight could even start, Nigel Benn and his team had a game plan to psych Eubank out, because they needed it, because Nigel Benn had had a very hard time making weight. Ben had came in weight 6.5 pounds over. Yes, you heard right. 6.5 pounds over, which he lost in 3.5 hours. Imagine that. He lost 6.5 pounds in a little under 4 hours. That is insane. So he's like, I need to buy a little bit of time I need to get into Eubank's head at least a little bit before the fight starts. So Ben knew that Eubank loved making his extravagant entrance musics. So he came into the ring, and Eubank would always play a song from the nickname that he called himself, Simply the Best. It would go something like, Simply the Best. That's how it would start. So Eubank was halfway through his entrance when his music was supposed to hit, and it was like, Simply and Eubank's manager panicked. He went to the back, and he said the guy was holding the tape. He's like, well, it's broken. It doesn't work. And Eubank didn't let that get to his head at all. He's like, man, it's just music. It's okay. It's all right. And really, that did not get to his head. Neither did Ben. Even though Eubank admitted in his book that Nigel Benn was extremely intimidating, he didn't let that get to his head, and he didn't let that show at all, because the first 4 rounds were incredible. It was an incredible pace. Both men had hurt each other several times. It was insane, and I don't know how many times I've said that in this video. But in the 4th round, Eubank had his chin on Nigel Benn's shoulder, and Eubank says that when you have your chin on someone's shoulder, it relaxes your jaw muscle, and he had his tongue out a little bit. And Nigel Benn, bam, hit him with a huge uppercut that, while his tongue was out, his teeth created a type of guillotine. And he said that opened a 1/2-inch gash in Chris Eubank's tongue that had him swallowing blood throughout the fight. And Eubank didn't tell his corner that, or the referee or the doctor that at all, because he believes, and rightly so, that they would stop the fight if they knew he was swallowing his own blood. But after round 4, the pace kind of went down a little bit in comparison to the first 4 rounds. Eubank started boxing very effectively, but Nigel Benn hurt Eubank with a body shot in round 6. But Eubank managed to even win the round, even though he was hurt at various times in that round. He still won that round. And in round 7, Eubank hurt Ben with a straight right and got hurt by a body shot at the end, nearing the end of the 7th round. And he even tried to fake that it was a low blow, something that he would do in the rematch. Which I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but just a quick preview of that. Round 8 and 9 were tremendous pace. Round 8, Ben dropped Eubank, and he went for the kill, but just couldn't get it done, which he might have regretted. Coming in round 9, when Eubank stopped Ben, he landed a straight right hand, 1-2, and then a left hook that backed him up, and he just went for the kill, and the referee, Richard Steele, stopped him. And man, Eubank was just crying. He said he was exhausted. He said in the post-fight interview that he had never faced a puncher that hit as hard as Nigel Benn. Several stuff he said after the fight that was really shocking. He said he hit me with shots that I didn't even know. He hit me with shots that I didn't even know were shots. He said, I need to go to the hospital. And he said, I'm in too much pain to talk. Chris Eubank said, I'm in too much pain to talk. And that shows us how hard this fight was for both men. They were completely exhausted. But as for the fans, they knew that one day they would fight. That they would fight again. And it took them almost 3 years, a little bit less than 3 years, to get in the ring again. That fight was so brutal that Chris Eubank said he urinated blood for the next 3 days. But he was champion. He had that victory over Nigel Benn. He was the one winning that rivalry as of now. He would go on to defend that title 3 times. The last time he defended that title was against Michael Watson, a fellow Brit, who many thought that Michael Watson deserved the decision, actually. Eubank won a majority decision, and he even rematched him for the vacant WBO super middleweight title, This time it had a bit of a tragic end. It was both of those fights were very good fights, but it ended in a knockout. Chris Eubank came from behind to knock him out. He was losing 8 out of 11 rounds, so he came back in the last round to win. And Watson ended up in a coma for 40 days, and according to BoxRec, he has permanent partial paralysis. So that fight ended in tragedy, just like a fight that would end in tragedy for Nigel Benn. But he would go on to defend that WBO super middleweight title 7 times. 7 times. Well, his last defense was a draw against Ray Close, who he would later defeat by split decision. So that would set up the rematch with Nigel Benn. Nigel Benn took him about 2 years to get in the title picture, where that loss against Eubank ate at him, and he just wanted the rematch because he lost. His managers say he was desperate. He was desperate for this fight. He was desperate for it. And finally, in October 1992, he fought Mauro Galvano, an Italian, and he went to Italy and knocked him out in the 4th round, winning the WBC super middleweight title. Chris Eubank was there, and he said, now we could do business. And this set up the first fight in history between 2 British world champions. And what a build-up and what a fight it was. This fight was so big that Don King came to promote it, and Don King had a contract with both of them that the winner and the loser would go to him. Eubank's promoter made extra sure that Eubank's music would work in the ring entrance for the rematch, and it did. And Eubank came in the ring as confident as ever, as arrogant as ever, man. Eubank has one of the greatest entrances of all time, man. He just comes in confidence, doesn't do anything flashy, doesn't have extravagant entrances like the Money Man, like Floyd Mayweather, doesn't have fireworks or anything. He just comes in, walks up, stares at the audience, stares at the ref, stares at everybody, strikes a pose, and he's ready to fight. And that signaled that this fight, the rematch, Judgment Day, was ready to go on. Interesting point about this fight is that Michael Nunn was at this fight, and he was supposed to fight the winner of this fight because he was with Don King, and the winner was supposed to go with Don King. But it's unfortunate that fight never happened. A fight that I would have really, really loved to see was Nigel Benn versus Tommy Hearns, especially Nigel Benn, man. Imagine that. Nigel Benn versus Tommy Hearns. Ooh, fireworks. Speaking about fireworks, though, this fight went back and forth from the start, man. Nigel Benn came in like he didn't want to leave it to the judges. He wanted redemption, and that's what he thought he was going to get. But this fight was a lot more tactical than the first round, than the first fight. Nigel Benn was a lot more tactical, and I think he realized that if he was out there to brawl, that a brawl would favor Eubank, that a firefight favors Eubank because of his iron chin and his confidence that no one could beat him, that he was strictly the best. So he wouldn't throw a bunch of combinations. He would just throw 1 or 2 or 3 punches max, and that would win him rounds. So up to rounds 5, I gave rounds 2, 3, and 4 to Nigel Benn. He actually hurt Benn several times in those rounds. And in round 5, he hurt him again. And it turned into a firefight. In a firefight, it favored Eubank. And Eubank won that round. And round 6, in my eyes. And in round 6, Nigel Benn hit Eubank with a low blow, which Eubank would admit. He would admit that he kind of exaggerated the effects because it didn't hurt him because he was wearing Chris Eubank was wearing 2 protective cups during this fight, so that punch didn't really hurt him, but he had to milk it a bit because he needed that point, and he needed a little time off because of the pace. The pace was brutal. Not as brutal as the first fight, but it was brutal nonetheless. So the referee took a point off in the 6th round, which ended up costing Nigel Benn the fight. So round 7 through 10, I gave to Nigel Benn. Ben hurt Eubank several times doing the tactics that I said. He wasn't boxing him, but he was fighting him very intelligently. He wasn't just going in there and brawling with him. He was jabbing, he was throwing that right hand and then pulling out. He wasn't being overzealous in this fight. Then before round 11, Eubank's trainer said, "Hey, you're behind. You need the knockout." And that's how he went in rounds 11 and 12, man. And round 12, wow. Round 12 is a great round, and they both exchanged haymakers, and they both got hurt during this round. I give it to Nigel Benn, 114 to 113. But the judges saw it differently. They had it 115-113 for Nigel Benn and 115-113 for Chris Eubank, and the other one had it a draw. So they had it a draw, and while Jimmy Lennon Jr. was reading the scorecards, they were facing each other. They were staring at each other like something wasn't done, like if there was still unfinished business. And they stared at each other, and Eubank says that he told them, "Hey, let's finish it. Let's squash it here. Whatever the decision, let's hug after." And then the decision was read, and Nigel Benn left. He's like, "Man, I ain't gonna hug that fool. I don't gotta hug him." And he never did. In this fight, it had some unfinished business because it ended in a draw. So what the promoters were doing is that both of these fighters were supposed to go with Don King, but they were supposed to go, the winner or the loser was supposed to go with Don King. And Barry Hearn, the promoter for both of these fighters before this fight, said, "Hey, you get the winner and the loser." But it was a draw. So they both got out of their contract. They both got out of their contract. And they both had pretty full careers afterwards, and they both defended their title afterwards. And yeah, they never had the rubber match, but Chris Eubank defended the title 6 more times until he finally had his first defeat against Steve Collins. He would lose to Steve Collins again, and the only man to knock him out was Carl Thompson, and that was up until 1998 for the cruiserweight. You're talking about a guy coming up from middleweight to fighting a cruiserweight now, a Carl Thompson. And in the rematch, he lost the rematch by knockout, but that was the only knockout in his career. The iron chin of Chris Eubank is incredible. And Nigel Benn will attest to that. Nigel Benn, he had 5 more successful defenses of his WBC title until he fought Tulani Malinga, and he lost his super middleweight title by split decision. And then he ended his career by 2 straight knockout defeats to Steve Collins as well. So they both lost to Steve Collins twice, man. I gotta do an underappreciated fighter on him. He beat 2 potential future Hall of Famers in Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn. So that's a very impressive feat by Steve Collins. Anyway, their legacies, they will always be intertwined as great rivalries are, usually. You will not be able to talk about Nigel Benn or Chris Eubank without mentioning their wars together, without mentioning their rivalry, their hatred, their animosity, because it was so great. It was so interesting. Their press conferences, their face-offs, their contract signings. They were so good. Where are they now? Well, I heard Nigel Benn is a devout Christian, and he says now, man, I don't even know where that guy is anymore. He's a completely different person. He says, yeah, I love Chris. We're good now. He says they're good. So no animosity from Nigel Benn anymore. Chris Eubank. Chris Eubank, he's as eccentric as ever. That guy is hilarious, man. He's one of my new favorite fighters now, bar none. Both of these guys are. He's walking around with the monocle on and wearing a sleeveless shirt when he's walking into the ring with Chris Eubank Jr. Another thing, they both have sons and they both box. Chris Eubank Jr. Recently, I think it was last year, he fought Billy Joe Saunders and he lost a razor-thin decision. Billy Joe Saunders just won the IBF title from Andy Lee, so no shame for Eubank Jr. of losing to a world champion. That's all right. And Conor Benn, he's not professional yet, but imagine the build-up for that fight if it could happen one day. That's the fruit of their labor. If they could have the ultimate grudge match, imagine that. That's the ultimate grudge match. Their sons fighting each other. Man, that would be cool. That would be really cool. But their legacies will always be intertwined, and you even hear rumors now that they want to make a third fight, man. Now that Nigel Benn is in his 50s and Chris Eubank turns 50 this year, so it is very unlikely that this fight will happen, but people still want to see it because we got unfinished business here. And that's what we got in this rivalry. That you had two great fights, but it never really closed. Never really closed. I'm sure for Nigel Benn it's closed, and for Eubank, but for the fans, it could never be truly, truly closed. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for sitting through all of this. I hope it was as interesting to you as it is to me. And for my UK fans, tell me how I did. Tell me how I did talking about British history, about British prize fights, about British rivalries. Thank you guys for watching, and please follow my January schedule. I will have my link to all my videos in January in the description. You guys have a great day.